Hi, Zandy. Can you think of someone you've worked with in the past who, after spending time with them, you just often felt more energized? They just tended to have a positive, inspiring effect on you. I can think of some, and some were bosses, others were colleagues. But similarly, I'm betting you can think of some past people you've worked with that just seem to suck the life out of you. Maybe not always, but when you think of that characterization, at least someone comes to mind. Well, when Jim Kouzis joined us back in episode 153, he explained how being inspiring is one of the top things people want to willingly follow us on our projects and our teams. But here's a question that I was left with. What causes someone to be inspiring? Is it innate? Can it be developed? And the more I reflected on it, the more I realized how little I truly know about what it means to be inspiring. Well, today we have answers on that from one of the leading researchers and voices on the topic. Adam Galinsky is joining us to talk about his new book, Inspire, the universal path for leading yourself and others. And because of Adam's well-respected research credentials, it's not a surprise that this book is packed with evidence-based insights. But he's also an amazing storyteller that weaves those insights into lessons that you and I can take to be more inspiring with the people that we lead. It's a discussion I've been looking forward to sharing with you. Hey, quick note before we get into that, I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a group of global leaders who are committed to transforming our ability to lead and deliver. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week, and it's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Thanks. Let's jump into our discussion with Adam about his new book, Inspire. So, Adam, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, hey, we'll talk about ideas in the book, but since we're talking about inspiration, can you think of anything from your family culture or early life experiences that inspired you to pursue psychology as an area of focus?
Well, both of my parents were professors at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, so I'm a born and bred Tar Heel.
Yeah.
And my dad was in clinical psychology and my mom was in social work. There's one actually really funny thing about that, which is my parents never encouraged me to go down this path. And their lack of encouragement, I actually took as discouragement.
Oh.
So when I was a sophomore in college, I was sort of an econ social theory major. And my parents were traveling. I called them up and I said, would you hate me if I switched to psychology? And they're like, no, we would love it. But they just didn't want to put pressure on me. And then I interpreted it a different way. And then literally 3 weeks in the semester, I switched all my classes and became a psychology major.
I love that. I love that. They thought they were doing the right thing by not forcing you in there, but you misread it. And that's actually an idea from the book here that we'll get to. But that you've studied this whole thing so extensively. And I mentioned in the intro, Adam, that I feel like the more I think about it, the more I realize how little I know. What are some common myths about inspiration that you see?
Well, one of them that you mentioned in the introduction, right, which is that inspiring leaders are born. There's something innate about them, something that you either have it or you don't. And I think that one of the things that my research has shown is that is a complete myth. And the reason why it's a complete myth is because what I've established in 20 years of research is that there is a universal set of behaviors, ways of being in the world that inspire people. And that's true in every country in the world. And because there's this universal set of attributes and behaviors, that means that any person can learn about them, they can nurture them, they can develop them, and they become expert at them.
Yeah. And I love that fact because it makes it extra special that it's not just an American thing or a Western thing. You found it across the many different cultures you studied. So if you'd have asked me before I read the book, or at least some while back, I think I would have said, well, to be inspiring, Adam, you have to be extroverted, right? Is that a myth that you run across every once in a while, that you have to be a cheerleader, if you know what I mean, that's what is inspiring?
Absolutely. I think there's some times where being extroverted can be momentarily inspiring. But if you look at like the characteristics that really make up what it means to be an inspiring person, we can get at those right now. There's sort of three factors that I found that really characterize, I call them the inspiring trifecta or the leadership trifecta. It's being visionary. So that's how we see the world. It's being an exemplar of desired behavior, how we are in the world, and being a mentor, which is how we interact in the world. Yeah. And a lot of those characteristics have nothing to do with extroversion or dynamic nature of being in the world, to be, visionary, two things are really important. One is having sort of a larger purpose embedded in it. But the other is being really simple, being really digestible, being able to make an idea like develop in someone's mind. And so being simple is certainly not extroverted. And then, being an exemplar, one of the key characteristics is being, calm and courageous, right? In some ways, we kind of think of like the John Wayne figure, from
Right.
Westerns, right? Of being, all the Gary Cooper, all the famous old Western, Clint Eastwood, and the third one is being a great mentor is about empowering people. It's about elevating them by sharing credit, for successes. None of those require extroversion.
Yeah, I truly believe it's a myth, and yet I think it's a common myth. So I appreciate how you explained it, and we'll get into a little bit into those. But I want people to read the book to get the full coverage. But
Yeah.
I said in the intro how there's the people who I felt more energized from. I think that's terminology I would have used, or they suck the life out of us. How do you like to describe the difference between what you call inspiring leaders and infuriating leaders? Because I think that terminology I actually like a little bit better than what I was using. And why is it that it's so important to think of them on a continuum like you discovered?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, first of all, I think one of the most important findings from my research is that leaders really matter. We might not oftentimes think of ourselves in leadership positions, right? As a middle manager, you might think, well, the CEO is the leader, but like anytime that you have power over someone, have some level of authority, or even just people look up to you, right? Like a child looks up to their parents, or a player might look up to a coach, or even another player. Whenever people give you their attention, that means that whatever you do is going to have a greater impact on them. And so that continuum, this inspire and infuriating continuum, really captures the fact that when we're in those positions of influencing people, of impacting them, we don't really have a choice of whether to impact them. We're going to have an impact them. And then the question is, are we going to go right or are we going to left? Are we going to go inspiring or are we going to go infuriating? And the way that I actually like to think about that, the two feelings, the phenomenological experience of being inspired and infuriating is, you might call it, one is the oasis of hope and possibility, or wellspring of hope and possibility, and the other is a seething cauldron of rage and resentment. And both of those are very powerful forces, but they're completely opposite of each other.
You know what I appreciated about the book, and I don't know if this reinforces what you said in the continuum, but I think we tend to think of this as being two-state. Like she's inspiring, he's infuriating, and yet, could it be that it's not if you are, it's when you are? Because I think you talked about it's your current behavior, right? That's where it is.
I love that. That's the perfect way of describing it. It's not are you inspiring or infuriating, it's are you currently inspiring, infuriating? When are you more inspiring or infuriating? And I think that question that you just said, when, is so important, because one of the things that I think is critical for people to do is to diagnose, right, their own experiences and figure out, what I realize? I realize that whenever I miss lunch, I become an infuriating ogre in the afternoon, right? That's really important for people to recognize. Like, when am I my best self and when am I my worst self? And then what we can do is we can almost think of ourselves as architects or captains, right, of our own experience. And like, how can I orchestrate the conditions that produce my more inspiring self and diminish those conditions that produce my infuriating self? And also, even if I can't diminish those conditions that normally create my infuriating self, just being aware of the potential being infuriating gives me the opportunity to have control over those tendencies.
I love that, Adam, because self-awareness is so important, but it's so difficult, right? But vocabulary matters. And so when you get vocabulary, you can tie it to, I can name it now. And you have some vocabulary about the leadership amplification commitment, but to tee that one up, let's say a listener gets an email from a boss late on a Friday that says, we need to talk on Monday. What's going to go on there is going to ruin the listener's weekend. And what can we do to kind of build on what you're saying if we're on either side of that email? Like, if I was to write that instead of write it that way, and if I was to receive that, is there anything we could do to make the weekend less stressful?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's take the person writing it, right?
Yeah,
One of the
yeah,
things that I've discovered in my research is that when anyone gets the phrase, I need to talk to you, or, a version of it is come by my office on Monday afternoon at 2 p.m.,
yeah.
right? Like that's not even I need to talk to you. It's a little bit more casual, but it's ambiguous. And because of that person's power, because of their authority, because we might look up to them, we imbue that ambiguity with portentousness or ominousness. So one of the things that I try to teach leaders is never tell someone you need to talk to them without telling them why. And I had an experience once where I had a doctoral student, right, who had less power than me as a professor. And I said, come by my office at 3 p.m. I need to talk to you. And she came by 6 hours later, totally freaked out. She hadn't gotten any work done for 6 hours. She was so stressed out. And all I want to do was look at some research materials. And I realized if I just said, hey, come by my office at 3 p.m., I want to go over your research materials, it would literally be 13 words. It would be the same number of words, right? So it wouldn't have cost me anything, but it gets back to a word you just said, self-awareness. Yeah. Like I knew it wasn't scary, but I had to know that she didn't know it wasn't scary. And there's one funny story I do tell in the book about a president of a multinational company who would do this all the time. And after I did a workshop there, they said to him, can you do what Adam proposes and tell us why? And he said, no. He said, I don't have the time or inclination to tell you my request. And so they began a negotiation with him. And he finally agreed that when his request to talk to them wasn't scary, that he would put 2 characters into his email or text, a colon and a closed parentheses, i.e. a smiley face, to say like, don't worry. And I saw one of the people, 2 years later, and she says, it's great. And if you don't get the smiley face, you run as fast as you can, to that situation. So that's the first thing. As the leader, just whenever you need to talk to someone, just tell them why. Right. It's just get into that training. Now, on the flip side, if you get that email on a Friday afternoon, and it's going to ruin your weekend, I think you can reach out and say, hey, being asked to meet, in your boss's office on Monday is a little ominous. Can you tell me what it's about? That happened to me once where my dean said they had to meet with me, and it was his assistant who emailed me. And I wrote back to her. I said, is this something serious? And she said, yes. And so then I knew that I had like at least I knew, right? So right. There wasn't any ambiguity, and I had no idea, what it was about. But it was, it ended up being a ridiculous thing where, a student had complained about something I said in class, but she had just completely misinterpreted what I had said, and it got resolved. But it was like, I couldn't even, because I didn't even, I had no idea what it was about. Like my mind was just searching for all the possibilities. But I think, reaching out and asking for, what's the topic so I can prepare. Like you could even make it a little bit different. Say, hey, I'd like to be prepared on Monday. I want to meet with you. Could you let me know what the topic's about? That's one way of not confronting them as much.
That's good. I like that. When you're telling that leader story, I thought you were going to tell the one about the bananas. Would you mind mentioning that? Because that's an example where they didn't send an email. Yeah. They didn't even say anything, right? Yeah.
So one of the things that we have to remember as a leader is we're on stage. And that means all of our nonverbal behaviors are also being closely attended to. So there's a man named Barry Salzberg. He became CEO of Global Deloitte, which tens of thousands of employees. And about 6 months in, he realized there was bananas at every meeting. And he was like, I've been at Deloitte for 35 years. Are bananas like a incredibly important symbol of Deloitte that I missed? Does someone really important love bananas? So he went to his assistant and he said, hey, why do we have bananas at every meeting? And she said, because you love bananas. He said, wait, what? And so apparently the first meeting that he ever had as CEO of Global Deloitte, he walked in, picked up a banana with, I guess, his assistant who's watching his every move with a little bit of enthusiasm. And she coded in her mind, Barry Salzberg loves bananas, had bananas at every meeting. And that's what she did, and so he had no idea that this inadvertent, behavior, could have such a big impact. Right. And so that's just a reminder that, we're always on stage. We're always sending signals, whether we mean to or not.
Yeah. And I know I'm dwelling on this one a lot here, Adam, but I just don't want to miss this opportunity to just give people a taste of what's in the book. It's called the leader amplification effect, but you also have an exercise called the leadership amplification commitment. Would you mention what that is?
Yeah. So, one of the things about the leader amplification effect is that all of our behaviors, bad but also good, right, have this great impact. In the same way we can infuriate, but we can also inspire. And so one of the things that I give this task whenever I do a workshop is I ask people to do this leadership amplification commitment, which is pick 3 people in their orbit who have less power than them and just reach out and let them know, either praise them or express gratitude, right? Say you hit that presentation out of the park last week. I just want to say that again. Or, hey, I completed, this task and I couldn't have done it without your help. And I have this great story where I was literally giving a workshop to 50 CEOs and presidents of organizations through the Young Presidents Organization, YPO. And at 10:15 a.m., I gave them this commitment. And then at 10:30, we're about to take a break. And one of them raised their hand. It's 10:29 now. So 14 minutes later. And he says, I just want to let you know, I already sent my 3 emails. Nice. I already got 3 responses back. They were effusive with joy. And one of them said, I'm finally going to take my spouse to that restaurant they always wanted to go to celebrate your comment. And so, one of the things that I actually tell people is you could actually take it to the next level. Imagine this commitment you could make. What if every single morning over a cup of coffee, you just sent out an email to someone in your orbit, thanking them for something they did or expressing praise for something they did really well? And this guy, Joseph Stigliano, who's president of a bank with 1,200 employees, he actually sends a birthday message every single morning to all of his employees. So that's like 5 a day. But he says it takes him like 10, 15 minutes. And so it'll take you no time. But you also get joy back. Yeah. Here's the thing. You send that, like the CEO, he got 3 wildly extravagant, oh my God, thank you so much emails. That makes you feel good, right? Yeah. And that's kind of what I call the virtuous cycle of inspiring. Like when you do those acts that inspire people, they often will do actions that inspire you back.
What I love about that story is it does, because if it just said happy birthday, smiley face or 2 emojis, right, but he gets real specific on things about him. And same thing with all these things in this commitment, right? The more specific we get, then they realize she really did take time to do this. It wasn't some, boilerplate.
Yeah, it's so funny. Joseph Stigliano showed me some of the emails, and like one of them was like, hey, I want to wish you a happy birthday. How was bowling this weekend? Right. That's all Perfect. It said. And then the person wrote back a novel about bowling. Right. I don't even know if you ever read it, sure. Because it was so long, it's just like this ins and outs of this, he showed me the response. Like I didn't even read the whole thing because it was so long, but it just showed how excited that person was to have received that you recognize that they go bowling, and that matters to them. Like what matters to the people around you?
Yeah. And it's related to something you said in the book that you've asked people all over the world, tell me about a passion of yours. So for example, they might've said bowling, right? Or something like that. And what I found is interesting is your interest is less about what they say, more about how they say it, if I remember right? So why is that? And how can that help us better understand inspiration?
Yeah. So I've done studies where you ask people to describe something. So you could describe, let's say, a topic that you know something about. And then you ask them to describe their passion. And you can see, we can code in videos, right, how people's behavior differs. And one of the things that you see is, and you don't even have to do this as a study. What I do around the world is I just pair 2 people up and I say, one of you describe the passion to the other. And then afterwards I say, tell me what you notice about the person. And collectively in the audience, within about 30 seconds, they'll mention their eyes got big beaming, big eyes, bright eyes, big beaming smile. They talk quickly. They move their hands all over the case. They leaned in, as if telling you a secret. And I think that is really, really instructive because that is, you mentioned the word extroversion before, right? And so, but introverts often have these unbelievable passions, right? And so if you can tap into what someone is experiencing, and if you can tap into your own experience, right, then you can really impact people. I want to go back to the leader amplification effect for one second, because there's a huge implication of it, which is in general, as humans, we were evolved as social beings. So that means our emotions and our states are generally contagious. But when we're a leader, they become truly infectious. So our passion can become your passion. Our calmness in a crisis can become your calmness. But on the flip side, your anxiety can become their anxiety. And that's another reason why it's really important to be aware of your own psychological, emotional, mental state, because you may be acting in ways that are perpetuating that state in other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If I'm like, okay, everybody settle down,
Yeah.
but I'm not settled down, it's going to get in the way of my message. Yeah. I thought there was this kind of cool sub theme throughout the book about the importance of perspective taking. And I think I struggle most inspiring others when I'm focused on my own needs and priorities, my own perspective. So I showed my 15-year-old daughter today the example you had where I think it was the number 61 and 91, like what number is this? Yes. So what are some geeky research techniques that use to understand perspective taking, and then maybe some things that you personally try to do to keep, make sure you're getting the other person's perspective or keeping that into account?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things, there's a phrase that I have that I really love that gets at perspective taking, which is different people have different needs at different times. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to just understand what is the person across from us in need at this moment, right? Sometimes they need to be listened to, right? Sometimes they need clear directions. Sometimes they need to be praised, right? And so part of perspective taking is just trying to understand what that person needs, at a particular time. The story I told about the PhD student is sort of a funny one because the student is, she's a little neurotic, right? So it's not surprising that she responded this way. But also, when you have someone who's neurotic, you want to understand that and be like, okay, they need a little bit more reassurance. You could get annoyed at them and say, what do they need all this reassurance for? But is that really going to make your life better and their life better? Right. Yeah. If this person needs, a little bit reassurance. And, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past was about using this stuff to be a better parent. Right. And so, that really, trying to think about what do your kids need, good example of this was, last summer a whole family went to Asia I had a conference over there, and just being really sensitive to what my kids needed to get through jet lag, and some of the demands we might have at home had to be relaxed a little bit because they were in a very different, mental and psychological state.
Right. That's good. And it related to that one. A little trigger I've been using, interested in your take on this, is whenever I find myself saying, how can this be so hard? I try to use that as the trigger, like, well, clearly it is. So I may be missing their perspective. So whether it's my child, it's like, well, of course they're having trouble with jet lag because they don't maybe think of it the same way I have when you've flown more maybe than what they have or something like that. So whenever we find ourselves saying, how can this be so hard? Well, it is. So maybe we need to do something to take into account, right? Thoughts about that?
Yeah. And I just think, it's a great example of that. Like we can get frustrated at, a good example is writing, right? And so one of the things that I have one of my primary roles in the world is to help PhD students become independent researchers. And that means, creating ideas, testing ideas, but then also writing about those ideas. And one of the things that I realized at some point is that it's much more effective for me to edit a paper with them sitting next to me because I can actually show them what I'm thinking and what I'm doing and why I'm making the changes that I'm doing, rather than just saying, this drives me more crazy than anything else from my collaborators. They're like, I don't like this paragraph. Can you change it? Like, well, why didn't you change the paragraph? Like you could have edited it. And so I never try to be that person who does comments without actually trying to solve the problem. Now, there's a second benefit of having the PhD students sit next to me why I edit their papers is it actually forces me to edit their papers. So I actually killed two birds with one stone.
I like it.
So it's my commitment device to work on the paper, and they get this ancillary benefit of actually learning how to be a better writer.
That's really good. And I'm thinking if I got a paper from you and it was all, I'm thinking of when I was younger and as a teacher, it marked up all in red, that make me feel maybe insecure as all that red. Oh no. and anxiety inducing. And I think I'm probably most infuriating, or at least a risk of it, when I'm feeling most insecure. And I'm curious situations where, Adam, I think of your level of success and notoriety. I think people might think you would never feel insecure. Right? Are there situations that you feel tempted to be insecure, and how do you overcome that so you're not coming off as infuriating as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. And we deal with people deal with insecurity in different ways, right?
Yeah.
So one of the ways that I think I deal with insecurity is hibernation, ostrich effect. Like I just try to I avoid when I'm feeling insecure. And so I recently this is my third and final year, but I've been a vice dean here at the business school, and even though I teach leadership, and even though I talk a lot about leadership, I had never been in a role with this type of authority, but also very ambiguous authority, because vice deans have, it's there's the dean, and then, and so I think, there was a point in my deanship where I was probably being infuriating because I was just I was working on other things. I'd work on my book because that's where I felt more comfortable.
Sure.
And so at one point I really had to take a deep breath and just kind of sit there and really think about, okay, what does this job need and what do I need to do this job well? And I think I'm doing a much better version of the job now. But yeah, the other thing is here's one thing I want to tell everyone. I think this is one of the most important things of all is, and this goes back to about, are you born or are you made, right? We're not perfect. Yeah. We have our ups and downs. And so what's one thing I've shown in my research that prevents us from dealing effectively with those downs, which is shame. The psychological experience of shame actually churns us into ostriches. I have actually called it the ostrich effect. And shame is actually a pretty unhelpful emotion, and so guilt is more helpful than shame, right? And guilt leads us towards reparative action. So, if you do something wrong, you got to forgive yourself. You got to let go of that shame and you just got to ask yourself, okay, how can I do this better next time?
Mm-hmm. It reminds me, when you and I, before we started recording, kind of alluded to some work by Stephen Rogelberg about self-talk, but I think that kind of applies there. Right? Of how do we talk to ourselves? Anything you either feel like you implement or you find helpful when you're helping other people implement anything from Rogelberg's research?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of research out there, and Steve did some great research showing that how we talk to ourselves has a huge impact on the future. And one of the things that he found is that he just asked people to write a note to themselves a year from now, right? And then he looked to see how that note predicted other people's assessment of them as a leader. So what's really nice about this research is you're separating, the independent variable from the dependent variable, right? It's not coming from the same person. And what he found is that people who had more positive self-talk were evaluated by other people as more effective leaders, also more creative, which I think is a really interesting one. Yeah. And one of the things that I showed in my research and I show in the book is that we can actually get ourselves into a more inspiring frame of mind through a variety of different reflection tasks. So one of the ways that we can get into an inspiring frame of mind is to think about the inspiring people in our own life and how we can emulate their behavior, right? But even sometimes more powerful is we can think about the times in our life when we felt we were our most inspiring self, and then try to tap into that. And what I've shown, for example, is that when people tap into those experiences when they felt powerful and in control in their best self, they're more likely to be that courageous person. They're more likely to be that passionate, authentic person. They're more likely to be super. And so if we can think of ourselves as super, we can become more super. And so self-talk is really powerful. One other thing that I just want to mention, which I've done research on, and other people have done research on this too, is that there's a simple technique that sounds so phenomenally simple that it just doesn't seem like it could have the profound effects it has. But it's this thing. Think about what are your most important values. Now what I want you to do is I want you to take your 5 top values and I want you to put them into a hierarchy. Like, what's your most important value? And from that one value, the other values emerge. So for me, my most important value is generosity. And what I mean by that is in every simple way, right? Like from over tipping, people like cab drivers and delivery people because I want to be generous for their hard work, to being generous to the difficult situations that people find themselves in. Like I said before, thinking about the fact that different people have different needs at different times, being generous emotionally, compassionately. And the research shows, so what I showed in my research, we brought people in who are unemployed. If any of you have been unemployed out there, it is one of the 5 biggest stressors in the world. Like it predicts depression, anxiety, even suicide, right? And so we worked with a Swiss employment agency, right? This is a national employment agency in Switzerland. We had people come in when they got laid off. They had to get unemployment benefits. They had to come into the center, and half of them were given an opportunity to think about their values for 15 minutes. We told them, rank your hierarchy, but we also said, think about times in your life when you have embodied those values, right? When you've behaved in a value consistent way. 2 months later, they were twice as likely to have found a job. And the effect was so strong, we had to cancel the study and give everybody the value affirmation. People have shown giving people this in 8th grade, you're more likely to graduate high school 5 years later. So reflecting on our values is also really important.
Yeah. What I think is interesting about that, Adam, is, how long we've been told this, I feel like for decades, we've been told, know your mission, vision, values are focus. And I feel like this is how I've treated it. Like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, but not do it personally, right? Not really intentionally, strategically do it. I feel like even in this last year, Adam, what you just said resonates with me more. And it's actually informing decisions now. It's not this ancillary exercise to go through. It actually has effect. And I think your book shows the effect even greater than what we realize. Yeah. That's cool.
One of their just sort of small technique, which I think is incredibly valuable, is, we think about our mission and our vision, but we don't think about how to make it come to life. So let me just give you a simple version of it. Like, our mission is to make our companies happy. So that's one version. Now, let me just change one word in that one. Our mission is to make our customers smile. And it turns out, like, just changing the word happiness to something that's more visual is actually pretty transformative, makes people more motivated, more engaged. And so the question is, we did a study that it hasn't been published yet, but we analyzed every convention speech in the 20th century for American presidents, Republicans and Democrats. And we coded for the amount of visual metaphorical language in their speeches. And it predicts the winners. And it's incredibly strong. And we control for economic factors, incumbency, even Gallup polls at the time of the first convention. And this effect still is robustly there. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So here's what comes to mind is I feel like moments that require inspiration can just show up unannounced, right? And so what are some ways that you try to practice inspiration personally, Adam, as a way to maybe develop, I don't know if muscle memory is quite the right word, but resilience or capability or capacity, just the ability to be ready when the next opportunity shows up?
Yeah, well, one of the things I think is I've since I've written the book, so this is not in the book, it's something I've come up with since then, is I have an acronym that I call REAP. And, if you go back to what it means to reap in the Bible, right, is to reap what you sow. And that's really about 2 things. One is your behavior today has consequences tomorrow. But it's also whatever you put out in the world comes back to you in the same form. So if you put out inspiration, you're going to get inspiration back. But my REAP is spelled differently. It's not REAP, it's REIP. So I think, the 4 tenets are: reflect on your own experience, right? When you're inspiring versus infuriating, reflect on the inspiring people in your life and then emulate them. So the R is reflection, the E is emulate. Churn those reflections and emulations into a specific intention or commitment. That's the I. And then set up some type of daily practice where you can engage in this more effectively. So as one example, you could say is, every time I write an email, I'm going to see if I can make it a little bit simpler and a little bit more visual, right? Those are two things. Or the daily practice I mentioned earlier. Every morning over a cup of coffee, I'm going to send out one text or email to one person in my world that thanks them, that reaches out to them, that lets them know they matter to me, whatever it is. And if you just make that a daily practice, then when people really need you, you're going to be able to show up and be inspiring.
Super practical. I like that. There's, Adam, so many things I'd love to talk with you about, but how about we end with this? Because we touched on it before the recording. We touched a little bit on the recording, but we have a lot of parents that listen to the podcast. Can you think of anything else from this Inspire research, that ways that parents can apply some of these ideas to develop inspiring children?
Yes. So I'll say three things. The first thing is that, a corollary of the leadership amplification effect is the parent amplification effect. And one of my doctoral students, who's now a professor at Berkeley, told this great story about how when she was 12, her mom just offhand comment said to a friend of hers, oh, both girls are really good at piano, but Abby has a real knack for it. Erica Bailey is my student. Abby was her sister. And she was so incensed that her mom said that Abby was a better piano player, that she never played piano again. And I saw her mom at her PhD graduation, and I mentioned the piano story, and she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Her mom had no idea why Erica had stopped playing piano. And that's a really important one, right? We don't know where. My greatest joy in the world is my older son, Asher, snuggling with me in the morning. He'll come to my bed. And then one day I noticed he was like crawled at the end of the bed, almost like a dog. And I was like, Asher, come snuggle with me. And he's like, no. And I was like, why not? He's like, because you don't want to snuggle with me. And I was like, that's not true. And he's like, yes, it is. And then later that afternoon, I was reflecting and I was like, 3 days ago, I was writing the book till like 2 a.m. He came in at 5 a.m. I just had to get some sleep. So I left the bedroom to go sleep on a couch. And he interpreted my leaving as his ultimate sign of rejection. And so I was able to go to him later in the day and say, Asher, were you upset at me 2 nights ago when I left the bedroom? He said, yes. And I said, I'm really sorry. And so by the next morning, he was snuggling with me again.
That's beautiful.
The second thing I'll say is one of the things that I've shown in my negotiation research is one of the most powerful things that we can offer someone is choice. So, the classic example, you're buying a car and the car salesperson says, I can give this car for $25,000 and a 5-year warranty, or $24,000 and a 3-year warranty. Now to the salesperson, that warranty is worth $500 a year, right? But you get to decide for yourself. And my sister-in-law did that with my niece, who would refuse to get dressed. So she started just hold up like this shirt or that shirt. She's like, okay, that shirt. She just started giving her choices. And then the final thing I'll just say is, different people have different needs at different times. So I used to take my son, I still take my sons to school, but my younger son was on the second floor. My older son was on the third floor. So I would drop my younger son off first, but my younger son likes to lollygag and he likes to have a ritual with me. And my older son was like, Aiden, hurry up. And he would get so in, and I would get mad at Asher. I'd be, Asher, be more patient, and then we're walking to school. This has been going on for a couple of weeks. And I was like, I have an idea. Why don't we drop Asher off first? And it was unbelievable. It solved the whole problem. Asher got to his classroom when he wanted to. Aiden got to take as much time as he wanted in his classroom. It was so effective that his teacher spontaneously said to me, Aiden's teacher, the younger one's teacher, said, your new drop-off schedule seems like a great success. And I was like, oh my God, did you? Fantastic. She's like, yeah, I could see Asher getting so upset. And now, Aiden shows up without Asher and everything's great.
Oh, I love that. That is so good. For those listening, you've just got a really small taste of what's in Adam's new book. If you'd like engaging evidence-based insights on how to inspire those around you, both at work and at home, get a copy of Adam's new book, Inspire. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, hey, Adam, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.